organizers for having me. Um, Full disclosure, if I sound a bit scatterbrained, it's been a long day. I've already done 2 interviews, one at CBS and one at CNN. Um, Normally I'm based in Odessa, Ukraine, which, as you know, is in a war zone right now. And just a few minutes ago, the air raid sirens went off in Odessa region. It's probably the fifth one today. And the reason I mention this is because whenever they go off, and now right now it's just past 10 p.m. there, children are woken from their sleep. If they're not sleeping and they're in school, classes stop, they're rushed to bomb shelters. Imagine the disruption, the PTSD people get after so many air raid sirens every day. During the work days when the alarms go off, McDonald's closes, banks closes, government office closes. So I just thought I'd mention that. Um, I'm very pleased to talk about this topic, although I have to admit, after being at the UNGA side events for the past 2 days, and a lot of it, by the way, was about Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories, I feel like ripping up my script and just ad-libbing it, which I am going to do a little bit. So I am a Canadian citizen, and this is my first time into the United States since Trump 2.0. And I got to say a couple of things because we are talking about democracies and autocrats and would-be autocrats, is that when I came in on Saturday, it's the first time ever, and I used to live in a Canadian-US border town on Vancouver Island. It's the first time ever that I felt so anxious. And I've crossed a lot of borders in my lifetime, some pretty dodgy borders. And I never thought this day would come where we could be denied entry based on what we've said on air, people like me, what we put in print, what we've posted on social media, what they think we've said. And this is a very, very disturbing time when a lot of Canadians, by the way, have had problems going in. And to the point where I included, we delete the social media apps on our telephones in case we're taken to secondary examination. They look through our stuff and they could ask us, what do you think of Trump? It's not a good place for what's supposed to be the leadership of the free world to be. Now, the other thing I wanted to say, and it's not to, I think I promised the organizers I would be very frank with you. There is some good news at the end of my speech, but let me get the bad news out of the way first. And that is, it really, if we take everything into consideration, what's happening around the world, we can't blame everything on the current occupant of the White House, but he can take a lot of credit for this. It does feel like the rules-based international order is in free fall. And one of the things that is happening because we're here at UNGA is that the severe cuts to the United Nations have been very, very deep. All organizations, including the one I used to work for, UNICEF, are having to decide what to cut. And at the end of the day, whether you're talking about UNICEF or World Food Program or UNAIDS, this does cascade down very, very quickly to the field, to the point where managers of certain UN organizations have to decide, do we bring out this vaccine or do we don't? Who lives, who doesn't? Who gets fed, who doesn't? And we don't have time for me to go much into Gaza, but what is happening there is just beyond belief. It's horrible, horrible, horrible on every level. I spent, I know pretty much every inch on the Gaza Strip. I've spent a lot of time there and also on the West Bank. And when I hear of this man-made starvation, famine, genocide, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what's happening. It just brings me back to the faces of young kids that we used to work with there. It's very, very difficult to watch. And, I'm often asked on air, so Michael, do you think now that the European Union and European allies have stepped up to end the war in Ukraine, do you think they'll be able to? And I replied, well, they have a man-made famine happening on their doorstep in Gaza, and either they're unwilling or unable to end it. So that's all everyone needs to know. It's very, very disheartening to watch the kind of impotence right now of these major powers. And, a few weeks ago, the European leaders went to the White House. I don't know if any of you watched that, but they buttered him up so much his cholesterol level must have gone through the roof. So, and then finally, to kind of end this wider framing, because I don't want to go over time, is that I do feel that, and I'm not alone in saying this, is that we are heading into a very, very polarized world where you have Mr. Trump here, and I remind you that he has threatened to take over my own country, Canada, and hence that's forced us into a situation where we're now realigning our trade routes instead of north, south, east, west. Xi Jinping in Asia, and it's not only Asia, trust me, he has an eye on the Russian Far East. And then, of course, Mr. Putin in Central Europe and on that one, we now are in a very, very unenviable situation where what were formerly red lines are now dotted lines or ambiguous lines. And what I mean by that, just look what happened recently in Poland with the Russian drones incursion, what happened recently in Estonia. It's something all of us actually predicted. And the sad thing here is that I don't want to dump too much on European leaders. They were already dumped on yesterday quite harshly by Mr. Trump, but they have either the inability or the unwillingness to tell their own populations, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we have to be on a war footing. We have to switch our economies to war economies. That's what Russia has done. Something like 40% of their GDP is aimed towards the war. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot more expensive to push back later on. Now, the other thing I wanted to say about the dangers of someone like the current occupant of the White House saying things to the media like, you guys are fake news, is that these types of things happen to have a cascading effect, not only within the United States, but worldwide. And what I mean by that is it's open season attacking journalists. And I don't mean by shooting them as is done in some states, but in terms of inviting the tech bros, for example, who are part of his circle now, to launch court cases against journalists or media outlets they don't like. It opens the door for ordinary people, his MAGA base, to intimidate journalists. Just look what he says at some of his rallies. It opens the way for copycat attacks, including by autocrats who admire him. And whether that's creating very, very difficult laws that make it impossible for journalists to operate, to just threatening them. And also, what's happening right now is very worrisome in terms of the restrictions on coverage, whether it's for the Oval Office or the Pentagon. And also what's worrisome are some of the legal costs that Mr. Trump has launched against a publication I've written for the New York Times, 1 billion or 1.5 billion. Don't believe for a minute that this doesn't cause journalists, no matter where they are, the Washington Post or the New York Times, to really shudder, not out of fear, but what could happen. So I know we have a lot of people watching online, but I will remind everybody that journalists are not a target, and deliberately targeting journalists is a war crime. I also, it's important for me because I did say I'm based in Ukraine. There are also democratically elected leaders. There are leaders that are very much lionized by the foreign media, like Mr. Zelensky, who are also using tools to corral the media or control them. And the top of mind example of this, if you want to know, is as soon as the war started, Mr. Zelensky said, okay, all of the main government-friendly TV channels, you're all part of what is called a 24/7 telemarathon. I'll be speaking, by the way, on this tomorrow in Ottawa. But basically what it is, 24/7 TV show with all the different outlets. It's very patriotic. No one dares criticize the government. And it also has Mr. Zelensky featured quite prominently. I wanted to mention a couple more things about what we're seeing happening, huge, huge threats to democracies and countries that neighbor Russia. So this Sunday in Moldova, a very, very important parliamentary election where the ruling party under Maya Sandu may actually get trounced, may actually lose. The reason we feel this way is a couple of reasons. Is number one, if you look back at the recent referendum on EU accession and also the presidential election where she got reelected, it was razor thin. And if it wasn't for the votes counted by the diaspora, it wouldn't have gone through. And now, in the past weeks and months, Russia has devoted millions and millions and millions of dollars to disrupt the elections, but also to sway the outcome. It even includes, because they're not only using a lot of money, they're using incredible tactics that we have not seen before, but it includes, as BBC reported the other day, they put it through a verification process of Russian-linked agents in Moldova paying people to masquerade as journalists. They go around, film people, and if they get a anti-government kind of comment or response, they throw that out on social media. And even though Moldova is a very small country, some of these types of posts have got 20 million views. It's quite disturbing.
Michael, if I can ask you to conclude and we can
Sure.
get into some
Yeah,
details.
yeah, sorry about
Thank you.
it. So anyways, on top of all of that, you're probably familiar with the other techniques you use, bots, fake accounts. There's also soft power, like using sports teams and cultural types of events. But just briefly, to end on, I think on a positive point, and this came up on Monday at a closed door event I was at, is that there is unfortunately a lot of gaps in international law where it makes it very, very difficult to prosecute the wrongdoers, whether it's an IDF soldier shooting at a young child for asking for food, or it's a Russian soldier kidnapping Ukrainian children so that they can be put up for forced adoption in Russia. So just quickly, universal jurisdiction it allows you to try a war crime suspect in a third-party state. So, for example, a Russian soldier identified perhaps through AI in Donetsk, killing a child, could be tried, for example, in Argentina, and these things are already being done. And finally, the use of technology, and by the way, I have copies of my book with me called Digital Pandemic. It's a lot of it isn't there. Technology has often been maligned, but it can also be used for good purposes. For example, facial recognition to identify perpetrators of genocide and for other ways too. Very quickly, I'll go back to a talking point I made earlier is every time, whether it's Donald Trump or somebody else calls the media fake news, we have to push back in the media community. We have to say, how dare you? How dare you say that? Because it incites bad things for media people. And then one more thing quickly, I am very concerned about this incestuous closeness that's forming between the so-called tech bros, the heads of Google, Facebook, and other platforms, and the Oval Office, and also their investments into iconic newspapers, for example, the Washington Post, that have already been, or LA Times has been affected, many, many others. Look at what's happening to the talk shows here right now. So it's something that people have to stand up. I don't know if it will make a big difference. I hope so, but it's a very, very worrying trend. Yeah, I mean, if we look at, for example, whether it's the EU or the organization I used to work for, Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, 57 member states, then they all have to vote similarly for anything to happen by consensus, or especially right now, NATO. It's a bit of a depressing scene because, as I said earlier about the situation we're in there right now, where it seems there are no solid red lines, there are only dotted red lines or ambiguous red lines. And these are the types of environments where autocrats and bad actors thrive. This is what they do. is when they see an opportunity, they probe and they probe and they probe. And this is exactly what's happening with Vladimir Putin and probing further into Poland, into airspace of other countries. And there was even a drone incursion into airspace in Amsterdam the other day. Not sure if that came from the Russians, but it's a very unsettled situation because I'll keep this short, but the whole idea of NATO is to have deterrence. And if Mr. Putin and people like him don't understand that if he's going to do something like this, put drones over Poland, no matter what their excuse is, and it's not met with a firm response, he will do it again and again and again. So that's why I tried to indicate in my address there, I veered a little bit off topic, is that we're in a very dangerous situation right now. And for example, if the worst were to happen and, Putin were to go further into Europe, I'm not so sure anymore, I hate to say this, that Article 5 would be invoked. And this morning, we heard from a retired US general who said, you know what? Chances are the US would not even participate in Article 5 if something very dire were to happen from Russia. So we are seeing these breakups in these multilateral institutions. I'll end on this. When I was spokesperson for UNICEF in occupied Palestinian territory and then globally for a short time. And there used to be a time when a child was on a school bus or whatever, and they wore that iconic UNICEF backpack. It was not only a bag for them to carry their school materials with them. They felt protection. They felt like it was a shield, and that no longer exists when you're a child in a conflict zone, and UNICEF or the other UN agencies that operate in Gaza can do very, very little to protect them, even their schools. So, but we can't give up, of course. And one last thought, if any of you feel powerless or you have something to say, you have a voice, I mean, aside from voting, of course, but contribute to opinion pages of our newspapers around the world. It's really, really important. And write down for yourselves, there's something here in New York called the Op-Ed Project, one word, and they will, for free, help condition you or train you as an op-ed writer, get you off the ground. And, these op-ed pages are read by a lot of decision makers. So it's really, really important that these pages be filled with your voices too. Thank you.